And we're back. I said we'd be about 2 minutes. I think maybe it was 2 or 3, I'm not sure. But as promised, we are here to speak about solar energy and focusing on that particular area of renewable energy and the transition that is being made. And it's quite a pertinent topic, especially here in Portugal, considering that we are in November. It is sunny outside. So we do have an advantage over a lot of countries. And I can tell you that from living in London for 7 years, sometimes I used to go 2 or 3 weeks without seeing the sun. So I really do appreciate it. I want to introduce you first, then I'll talk about the general context of the topic, and then we'll get right into the discussion. So it's a pleasure to have with us here Carlos Relancio, Head of Renewables at Galp, Pedro Jorge Amaral, President of APREN, that's the Portuguese Renewable Energy Association, and also Wolfram Sparber, who's the Vice President of EUREC and Head of Institute for Renewables Energy at EUREC Research as well, and we'll get into your role in just a minute. I did want to set the scene here for our discussion because solar is very much at the center of the Repower EU strategy, and there's a huge potential to be really a key player in the acceleration of that transition. And according to the information that I was seeing, there's really a plan to reduce, obviously, the dependence on Russian fossil fuels, and to focus on renewables and increase it from 40 to 45% of all energy consumption. The increase of photovoltaic panels and capacity is also very much a topic on the agenda, to increase that by 2025. And I'll let you gentlemen, because you are the experts, really focus on the details. But Carlos, maybe I'll start with you, and let's focus on what Galp has been doing and is doing, because here we did have already a conversation on renewables overall. Then we talked about green hydrogen. Tell us about solar.
Okay, thank you very much, Pedro, and thanks for the invite to be here. Galp, as today it has been clearly stated, is not only about renewables; it's about many other activities that we are running related to our activity in hydrogen, to our activity in low carbon hydrogens. So the commitment of Galp is that we are investing 50% of our capex in the energy transition, and 30% of the total capex is only for renewables. Okay. 3 years ago, the presence of Galp in renewables was almost zero, and today we have 1,300 megawatts in operation, which bring us to be the third biggest solar operator and solar producer in Iberia. So this is a reality. This is happening today. It's not a PowerPoint. It's not something that is a promise. Yeah. It's something that today is happening. So there is a very big commitment of Galp to doing that. Also with the mind of an industrial operator. So there is a lot of people that has been onboarded in Galp in the last 3 years, even in the middle of the COVID crisis, to run this business from the traditional industrial point of view of Galp taking care of the details and trying to advise. So I think this message is very important. We are looking also not only to Iberia, we are expanding also to Brazil. Next year we will start our investments of our plants in Brazil also. And as I said, today we have 1,300 megawatts in operation. Our target, committed target, is to be in 4 gigas, 4,000 megawatts in 2025 and 12,000 in 2030, okay, which is very ambitious.
Yes,
very ambitious, very aggressive, and of course with a combination not only of solar but also adding some wind projects.
Pedro, I had the pleasure of speaking with you a few weeks ago.
Pleasure was mine.
and we obviously already delved into this topic, but it's great to see you again here, because we've talked a lot, even today, about Repower EU and the role that solar has to play, and we've talked about concrete measures and dates and deadlines. Just to open up the conversation as well from your side, are the goals of Repower EU realistic, and what is solar's contribution to making that happen?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. Solar is definitely one of the technologies that's going to be the basis of the energy transition for the base load of the electrical consumption. Mm-hmm. When the Repower EU was set, this is after the invasion of Ukraine, there is an intent to actually replace part of the fossil fuels with green hydrogen, and the only way that you can get green hydrogen is through renewable electricity. And the two main sources that you are going to get to actually have renewable electricity to produce green hydrogen and then synthetic fuels from non-biological origin, it's actually through solar and wind. Now, solar and wind, all over Europe, they have different intensities and different base loads, but in Iberia, I think we are fortunate, as you saw from the weather today, that we are actually fortunate to have a huge amount of hours, and that can help us going to a base load with wind and PV, with solar, and actually try and satisfy the demand of power and energy. I think the measures of REPowerEU, more than if they are realistic or not, they are demanding, because we are moving into a space where renewables and basically PV, we need to remember that 10 years ago, PV would cost around, let's say, 400 euros per megawatt hour. And in 10 years, we are on the range of 25, 30. So we slashed it down from 10% of what it costs. So we are now replacing fossil fuels, not only because it's environmentally friendly, but because it's also economically competitive. And now it can lead us to energy independence and security of supply. And so the portfolio of renewables that comes from the measures and the goals that was set by REPowerEU are in a way that I think the Iberia economy as a whole is going to benefit, because we are the region in Europe that, with a portfolio of renewables, most benefit from the amount of capacity and the amount of hours of that renewable source. And fortunate, we are the cheapest ones in solar. And if we don't do anything dramatically wrong about interest rates and inflation, I think we'll be sustaining ourselves as the most competitive one with the levelized cost of electricity for PV. So yes, I think the targets are achievable. More than achievable, I think they are mandatory to move in that direction. I'm not really concerned if we get there 1 year earlier or 1 year later. That I don't think that's actually the point. The point is to put the train in motion, and once it's set, the inertia is going to take us there. It's going to take market players, operators, consumers, industrial consumers, to make sure that this energy transition moves forward, and we completely make ourselves not relying in any of the fossil fuels coming from Russia.
Wolfram, first of all, I'd like you to share a little bit of the work that you're doing on a daily basis with EUREC, and then talk to us about some of the challenges that you see from a EU perspective, because we've heard people here be very confident from an Iberian perspective, but from a EU perspective, what are the challenges there to direct more effort and more success on the solar energy supply and impact?
So, thanks as well from my side for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here to discuss with you. We are an applied research center, and I'm involved in the Association of the European Renewable Energy Applied Research Centers. What we do is to drive innovation, to bring new product, new systems, work on high efficiency of systems, driving down cost, and allow that to work out, obviously together in close cooperation with smaller, larger, very large companies. So this is what we do on a daily basis. We do this in European projects, we do this in bilateral cooperation, we do it in the institute which I'm heading on energy efficiency in buildings, in heat pumps on the thermal side, we do it on PV integration in buildings, on PV integration in systems, on getting more kilowatt hours out of every megawatt which is being installed. I myself did my master's thesis once, many years ago. I studied applied physics in PV, and I remember very well that was around 20 years ago. A PV system cost around 45,000 euros for a single family house, okay? And I remember at that time talking to people, they said, this is a waste of time, what are you doing? This is good for a satellite, this is good for a mountain hut, but it's nothing for anything else. And now we are seeing where we arrived. We arrived much further than even the sector where I've been working in for many years ever believed we could reach, to be the cheapest, in many countries, the cheapest the cheapest electricity source which is available. And this is the path we have to go forward. So what we have to do is to be very fast in implementation, and we had it already in the independence before. I think democracy and bureaucracy is a big, so bureaucracy and permitting is a big obstacle in being faster, in bringing
across
megawatts
member states
and gigawatts on the ground. We see it in Portugal, but I see it a lot in Italy, where is the country where I'm from. I see big discussions in Austria, big discussions in Germany, where more gigawatts are being installed. Nevertheless, it is a topic. It is a topic for solar, it is a topic for wind even more because it's more impacting, but as well for solar. And we have, and I think this is, with all the tragic side that Russian invasion in Ukraine showed us in Europe, we should see this as an occasion to say, look, we have been living in a system which turns out not to be sustainable and not to be stable. It can't be that one of the strongest economies of the world is struggling because one man decides to turn down a gas pipe. So this is just not possible.
Yeah.
So we have to invest in our own capabilities to produce cheap energy and to have value chains in place. And coming back to the innovation part, and this is with which I want to close, I think it's important to have mass deployment on the one hand, but on the other hand as well, go on in innovation. We saw this driving down of cost and enhancing of efficiency in 20 years' time. We're just kicking off a European project with many big partners in the next couple of months about the next step in efficiency increase. So a solar cell usually has now around 20% of efficiency, and we see the chance that we bring this up to 30% of efficiency. So 50% more on the same surface, on the same amount of technology, and with a little layer of a tandem cell, so taking a traditional cell and putting a second cell on top. And obviously, if you look at these steps, that allows you again to do a further increase of what we are talking, driving down cost and getting more kilowatt hours out of the surface which we have available.
You know, most of the articles that I read and most of the insight that I get regarding solar is that the argument regarding the efficiency and the price is already there. It's been won, but storage is a big part of this conversation, right? So how is that going? And it's a question to all of you. You can all pitch in, please, from your different viewpoints, but how fast is the technology moving in order to be able to increase storage dramatically so then it can be, solar energy can be massified and be a major part of the grid?
Mm-hmm. I always like to say that in solar we won already the race of the cost. As we were saying, so solar is the most competitive source of electricity in the world. So even in some years ago, it was necessary to have, when there were auctions in some countries, it was like technology separated because it has to protect the technology. Now solar can go to any auction anywhere. It's always beating any other electricity. So this is the first. So the second battle is the storage, as you are saying. So we have a question of how we are going to manage the cheapest source of electricity. We were in a very good, let's say, the learning curve, the decrease of the cost of solar has been huge, as Wolfram was saying, amazingly, and Pedro, amazingly huge, with a reduction in 10, 12 years of 90% of the total cost of installation. The speed that the storage system was coming, the learning curve, was even higher than the solar. So we were in a path that the cost of the storage was going down faster than that. Unfortunately, we faced these disruptions, first with the COVID, second with the war, and unfortunately now this curve of this tendency is not there anymore. But what we see, what we believe is that the storage is absolutely a must. So the level of penetration of intermittent renewables, either solar or either wind, in a system, there is always a limit because you need some stability in the grid to fit. So one day there is no wind, one day there is no solar.
Exactly.
Okay, what do we do?
Exactly.
So then you say, okay, according to my portfolio mix, then okay, we cannot have more than 50, more than 60, more than 70% of what is called intermittent generation technologies. Yeah. With the storage and with the deployment of storage, it's possible to increase that level. And today, this is something that all the companies, for us, it's absolutely clear that all of us, we are thinking in already installing storage, not only in our current plants, but I see that no more, let's say in the next 2, 3, 4 years, all the plants are going to come already with the storage. It's the only way. It's the only way to grow in the independency and also to face all this revolution of electrification, all this path to electrification of the economy.
Okay, I wanted to get...
So
yeah, please do.
Let me take this a little further. So we have mainly in Iberia 3 storage mechanisms that we are going to use. One is hydro dams, which you can reverse pumping and use electricity when it's cheap and put the water from a lower level to a higher level and do the turbine process again. You're going to have green hydrogen because our levelized cost of electricity is very low, and then you're going to have batteries. And you're going to have 2-hour batteries and 4-hour batteries on standby. And all of these 3 storage systems are going to be the ones that are going to massively be used to balance the supply and demand at every point. But the interesting part here is that what storage is going to allow us, especially on batteries and probably on hydro also, is energy shifting. So if you have all of the solar producers on a very sunny day producing to the grid and you do not have enough demand for that, with storage you can actually capture that amount of power, and instead of having 0 economic value, it starts to have an economic value. And that's how you're going to finance the storage systems. And there are a lot of beliefs and myths that you can be producing electricity when there is no consumption. That's a physical impossibility. We have a physicist here. It just doesn't exist. So you can only produce electricity when you have consumption. If you do not have consumption, the system cannot produce, otherwise frequency will go up and you will collapse the system. And so storage is going to be that way that we are going to have different types of storage. There are moments where we're going to have an imbalance for 3 minutes. There are moments that we're going to have an imbalance for 3 hours, and there are moments where we're going to have an imbalance for 3 days. And for each of these imbalances, you're going to need a different technology of storage. So the shortest times will be supplied by batteries, mid-term hydro, and then the long transitional storage needs to be done through either green hydrogen or synthetic fuels of non-biological origin.
I know you wanted to jump in here as well.
If I might add something.
Please do.
We, in the last years, at the beginning, we focused a lot on single technologies. And at a certain point, we were discussing in my research department, but how does it fit all together? So we said, okay, we need to really see the overall energy system as a whole and go deep in order to understand how this transition can work. So we started working on simulations, taking single regions or whole countries, taking the whole supply, consumption, the transport sector, taking the industry sector, taking the heating and cooling sector, the electricity seeking, breaking down hour by hour and see supply and see demand in order to understand how the transition is going to go, run through thousands of models with different supply scans, wind obviously produced when wind is there, solar produced when solar is there, in order to see how much batteries do we need, how much hydrolyzers do we need, and so on and so forth. And what we see in these models, running through these models, there's one thing of the batteries which has not been mentioned, but we see a lot in our models, which is the batteries which are coming with the cars. So if we decarbonize our transport sector, we're going to have a lot of batteries distributed over the whole grid. And these are big batteries, much bigger than if you do as a single person, you buy a home battery that is one size. But if you have a car, an electric car, you have more or less 8 times that size in your garage. And you don't pay that because you buy a car, but the battery is included. So if you have the possibility to do smart charging, and in future to go a further step to vehicle to grid, you have really a big balance which is in there. And that is quite easy because the customer is going to charge his car when the electricity is cheap, and when electricity is cheap, there's a lot of electricity in the market. So it's a self-compound. So the fact that Galp, for example, is investing on the one hand in renewable energy, but in the other hand as well in charging infrastructure makes a lot of sense.
Pedro, when it comes to European funds, obviously the investment that is coming from continental sources is very important. Do you think that these funds are being well used, well utilized? What's your feedback?
There's one thing here, and allow me 35 seconds just to mention 2 facts. One is all of the renewable energy investment, at least in Iberia, is private investment. It's not state or public investment. These are companies taking the risk of going out in the market and making the thing work. The only thing, between brackets, as an only thing that the governments need to do is create a stable regulatory framework to make sure that all the investors that want to put money in this, either through equity or debt, have a vision of 20 to 15 years how this is going to behave. Now, what we need the funding for is actually to those technologies that are still on we call the technology readiness level, not commercially deployed. Let's say green hydrogen might need some support to CapEx in order to make it, let's say, more attractive to investors to reduce part of that risk. Now, the other funds that are going to be needed, I think it's about supporting more the demand than actually the supply. What the supply needs is a clear legal framework, very clear rules of engagement, making sure that governments are not creating a windfall profit tax or are generating a new tax, because taxation on the energy and power sector goes almost to 50% with all the small little things that are added to this. And so I think the funds need to be actually supported for, let's say, technology that it's pre-commercial deployable. And when I mean pre-commercial deployable, is it banks are not yet believing in it, so you need to create what we call an offset guarantee to make sure that they can test the technology, and this needs to be done through those funds. And of course, you are going to support and need to support vulnerable consumers in the energy transition. And you need to use, in my opinion, part of those funds to go net zero. And that means increasing the possibility of people using renewable power or renewable fuels. And this is the way where, in my opinion, the European funds need to be deployed. There are actually conversations now that the funding part that comes from the Resilience and Recovery Plan can also be used for the energy transition in some slots, and we need to see how the Commission will come up with those rules. But from the supply side, these guys and their competitors, they've been doing this with their own money all of their lives. And so this is not public funding, this is private investment. And so when we are talking now that renewables saved the electrical consumers 2.6 billion in Portugal in 2022, that's from private investment. That's not public money. So that's the system, because the majority of the wind and PV producers are selling to the grid at a much lower cost than the market is paying. And that difference is injected again into the electrical system. And that is what it's allowing for consumers to not increase their electricity bills. So this is not about the state doing this. It is private money doing this.
I don't know if you want to react to that as well, because obviously Galp has been at the center of that.
I have to support 200% the words of Pedro. There is no other way. And yeah, because this is sometimes a myth, and that the support to renewables. And at the end of the day, and the stability of a regulatory framework is absolutely essential. Some years ago, I had the opportunity also to be in countries which today are very, very good, have a very high level penetration, and the government was telling me, but how we are going to finance the renewables? I said, you don't have to finance anything. You have to give a steady, clear rules of game.
Yeah, the legislation, right, to be able to support it. Yeah,
and then the investors will come. There is no need for that. And also, what it's good to understand is that, now, unfortunately, the prices of electricity are very high, and we are suffering, and the government are making all these movements. But this is not going to last forever, and it has never been like this. So the scenario of prices that all the investors are managing, absolutely, is different from what we are having today. So it's good that and we are here to invest and to support the good times and the bad times. Yeah? And we are here, as Pedro was saying, with an investment of 15 to 20 years, at least minimum, because the returns are small. So we are saying that. So this is a long run. This is not something. And of course, Galp, the investment of Galp and the spirit of Galp is being a long-term investor in renewables. So we are not, as I said before, we are an industrial player for creating jobs and creating wealth around this.
Wolfram, I wanted you to tell us what current projects you're working on, or you can share with us that at URAC research that can really change the landscape and be innovative.
No, for example, one where I was telling, we are a lot focused on overall systems and overall system efficiency. And there, one point is to make sure to get best out of a system which is in the field that is possible. And we did several projects with big partners like TÜV Rheinland and others, where we examined thousands of tickets where maintenance has been done on PV systems. And what we see is that PV systems are running well, but they could run a little bit better. And if you have gigawatts of systems like Galpass, to have 2 or 3% more output, it's a lot of money, and that is sufficient. So we are working exactly on that field. How can you use drones? How can you use communication between drones and inverters in order to do fast scanning of PV fields, in order to see which kind of modules are not working 100%, which kind of strings are giving problems? How can I adapt that before seeing a certain part breaking completely down? Because if it's broken, okay, then you see it. But how can you really squeeze out the last part of it in order to make it happen? So that is one example of the PV field. A completely different example, just because we were talking a lot of gas. Gas is used a lot as well in the heating sector in Europe.
Of course.
In Italy at least it's strongly dominant, but I think as well here in Portugal it's used a lot. There we are working a lot, and this is somehow connected to low temperature district heating grid. So how can I reuse heat which is coming out of supermarket, which is coming out of data centers, which is coming out of industries, but it's not super high, in order to bring it through heat pumps and low temperature district heating grids to other appliances, taking cheap renewable electricity, transform it in heat, but use an efficient heat source, and don't waste the heat where I'm wasting it at the moment with a certain cost, but actually reuse it in other applications. And there we see grids, and we have applied projects going on in France, in Italy, in Rotterdam, in Germany, in Sweden. I would be happy to see some as well in Portugal going on, where we use low temperature sources like ports, for example, like coal mines, like cooling centers for hospital cooling systems, and so on, in order to bring it back to heat quarters which are nearby.
I guess as we wrap up our conversations, I still have quite a few questions, but if I could maybe put all of them in one, it would be, what are some of the best practices that you think exist in the European Union now, and what message would you have to the legislators, because it's really come up a lot, the decision making, the regulations, in every panel really. So what message would you have for the governments to ease a lot of the pains and the pain points that you have on a day-to-day basis? And I could start with you.
So I would start saying, on the one hand, really permitting has to be fast and clear. I think what industry wants is not a lot of money, but is clear surrounding conditions and fast decision. And we need now fast deployment of a lot of renewable energy, and especially solar. That is one side. If I can talk about innovation, we need there a clear innovation framework, and I think there the European money helps a lot, and the national money helps a lot to really put it in applied research in order to see new products and the new European value chain to come up in the next years, in order that the growth in future is as well a European-based growth, European companies, European welfare.
Okay, it's clear.
I think we need to criticize the government, but we also need to compliment when they are doing the right thing. And we had a new legislation package at the beginning of 2022 that was published, that was developed by the previous, the same Secretary of State with the previous minister, that is creating a legal framework and a huge amount of possibilities in the Portuguese legislation that are now being copied by other countries. Okay. And without going into very technical jargon, I would say that hybridizing wind and PV is something that we already allow. Having the possibility of having the network bidirectionally functioning to make sure that we are not on a paradigm where we have a power station just supplying, but you have all the economy supplying and consuming electricity. That is also predicted. Standalone storage is also predicted. So there are a lot of things that were good in our own legislation. What we are lacking is that we are still looking at the entities that need to go through license and permitting with the same glasses as we were 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And this needs to change. We have competent people, we have the organizations that we need, but we need to have more people, modernize the organization, create new processes for licensing and permitting, put web systems where everyone knows what's happening, because if we don't speed up licensing and permitting, and again, the people that are working there are doing their best, but they are the same for a huge amount of projects that are coming now, much bigger than it was before. And this is something that we need to do. And we also need to involve the municipalities in this, because at the end of the day, our wind farms and our power stations for PV, all of them are not going to be installed here or in Lisbon. They are going to be installed all over the territory, and municipalities need to be able to have an economic development gaining from this also. Okay.
Final remarks from your side?
Again, fully agree with what Pedro is saying. And I would like to highlight two topics and to add one. The first, regarding the people, absolutely agree. So there are not enough resources in the administration, and even more in the local administration, to handle and to manage all the projects that are coming to the table. And this is, they do whatever they can. The civil servants are doing whatever they can, but it's not enough with the avalanche of projects that they are facing. This is the first. The second, regarding the new legislation, I would like to give an example, which for me, and you know, I am proud of this example. With this new legislation package that was approved in Portugal, a very concrete event. Galp, we make a mechanical completion of one plant in Portugal. 5 days later, we were injecting electricity to the grid. 5 days later. Just a comparison, wow. In Spain, the minimum period for this is 2 months. And today, with the current situation, we are seeing averages between 4 and 6 months versus the 5 days in Portugal. So I think this is something that we have to be proud, and we have to complement the result of this, which really what it makes is speeding up the connection and interconnection of renewables to the system that decrease the dependency on fossil fuels, and the best finally the cost. And the last point that I should say, maybe not only for legislators, is that, but I think that this is a debate that it's coming now, but it's something that it should be good to highlight more. It's about interconnections. Pedro was saying before, we have the best LCOE in Portugal of all Europe. Does it make sense to make PV in countries where they have 900 hours of sun per year, when we are having 2,000 hours, when our cost of electricity producing solar here is half the cost that they are there? And the only way to do this is through interconnections, to have a real single market of electricity in Europe, which unfortunately today we cannot have. And to have the opportunity that from a Portuguese plant, we can be selling electrons to a Dutch company, or to a German company, or to a Norwegian company. So, and this could solve many problems and could accelerate the problem of the dependency that today we are having in Europe.
I saw you react quite a lot, so I'm going to give you just another minute if you want to.
No, I think this is exactly the point as well in the stabilization of Europe, and this is what we see as well from a renewable platform. We are stable because we have different conditions, different sources which complement each other. But if there is no grid, this complementation cannot be, because everybody is dependent on the source which is there. But if we have a grid, then it works well, and we can stabilize, lower the cost, and give a support to our industry.
Okay.
And just to finish up, we need to identify the elephant in the room, and we need to recognize that France has about 70% of installed capacity by nuclear technology. Yeah. And I understand there are a lot of sunk costs, and they are usually committed to that technology. But this is the European Union, and so we need to actually increase the interconnection capabilities for electricity, also for natural gas, in order that Iberia also, because in due time they have liquefied natural gas terminals that can export through a pipeline. But at the end of the day, all of the capacity that we are going to have from PV, and keep in mind that we are the last ones in Europe to run out of sun in the winter. So all of this, if we do not enough consumption, a lot of European countries could have that consumption, and we need to reinforce interconnections for that.
Thanks for that, gentlemen. Wolfram, Pedro, Carlos, thank you so much for sharing your insight. Really insightful conversation, not just this panel, of course, but all of the panels which we've had here today. We talked about the economic impact of the transition and how that can be sped up. We also talked about renewable energy overall, focusing on green energy and green hydrogen, and then lastly on solar energy as well. So we would like to thank all of the speakers who are here with us today. Also thank GAP as a partner, thank the municipality of Oeiras as a supporter, the sponsors, and of course this is such an important initiative by Jornal de Negócios, Sábado, and CMTV to make sure that this topic is very much front and center in the media agenda. From my side, from our side, it's goodbye. Look forward to seeing you very soon again at the next event part of the Electric Summit. Thank you.